So I'm Cordon, I'm a music therapist.
And I'm Nicole, I'm a neuroscientist.
And we're going to talk to you today about how we started a podcast for social change.
So before we begin, we have an activity for you, but can everyone here please imagine a scientist? What is the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about who a scientist is?
Are they wearing a lab coat? Are they white? Do they have crazy hair? And are they a man? So that is one of the most common things people think of when they think of a scientist, a white man in a lab coat. So that's something we're trying to break down in our podcast.
So the idea for our podcast came about a year ago. We were both living in Montreal, doing grad school, spent a lot of time talking about our struggles, the state of the world, science in general, and so we knew we wanted to do something, and we weren't exactly sure what that was. So we attended the Women's March. We got this beautiful book by Rachel Ignatowski called Women in Science, and we saw Hidden Figures, which both of these were things of media that represented stories of past women scientists that you don't often hear. And so we were really inspired, and we also wanted to contribute more media like this.
So as women in science, we know that there are different struggles that women face in science, and we wanted to talk about, break through some of these struggles in our podcast. So one of the struggles is underrepresentation. So women in science, there's a history of them being underrepresented in media, in education, and in history. So we never see and we never hear about women in science. And when you're learning about the different things and the way the world works, you don't often learn about how women also helped contribute to how we live today. We also know that women in science face unique challenges in the workplace that are different from the men in science. So these can be sexism, sexual harassment, different paths taking. So women have a hard time following the same path that men do to move up in the science world. And we also wanted to talk about the different challenges that women of color and women from other marginalized groups face in science as well. And finally, we wanted to really break down the societal stigmas around women in science, women in academia, women in leadership, and really women in the world today.
So in this past spring, we launched our podcast, Super Women in Science, which discusses the past, present, and future of women in science. So our aim with this project was to increase exposure of women in science, so a wide variety of different women, as well as a wide variety of different scientific endeavors. So not just that traditional lab coat scientist, but a whole world of science. So we hope that our project will inspire future generations of women who are interested in entering science, as well as create a supportive community for current lady scientists. So our episodes are up on SoundCloud or iTunes. They're about 30 to 40 minutes long each, and they each involve a discussion period where Cordon and I talk about a current topic or relevant issue, and then we talk about one specific field, and within that, we read a story about a past lady scientist from the book by Rachel Ignatowski. We interview a current lady scientist in the field, and then we highlight an opportunity or an organization for the next generation of women to go into this field.
So we've had a great experience so far. We were really, Okay, thank you. We were really warmly welcomed into the science Twitter and science communication communities. And we've also had a great experience of surprise of how many people are actually listening to our podcast. It's not just our moms like we thought. We've also gotten the chance to learn about so many great past women in science. So Dr. Lillian Gilbreth, Rachel Carson. We've got to learn about Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, who is the first medical woman doctor in the United States. Sylvia Earle, who's an explorer and an aquanaut, so a lot of great women scientists. We've also gotten the chance to move outside of our friend circle of women in science and interview women from all over the world who do so many great things in science. So we have interviewed Dr. Heidi Stelzer, who's an environmental researcher in Colorado, Melissa Marquez, who's a wonderful marine biologist and science communicator who lives in New Zealand, and a lot of other cool ladies in science. We've also gotten the chance to learn about organizations like Black Girls Code, who run community workshops and teach young women how to code, and projects like Super Cool Scientists, which is a really awesome women in science coloring book. So we would love to do this podcast for forever until we retire to our dog farm and pass the torch on to somebody else. So while we're working, we would love to break more into education, go into the schools, talk about women in science, run workshops and day camps for young women in science as well.
So for the rest of our presentation, we're just going to kind of go over what we've learned on our journey so far and things that we think would help if you are also interested in starting a podcast. So the first thing is to not be afraid of the world of podcasting. It's easy to listen to like NPR and be very intimidated by these professionally produced shows, but the reality is that Cordon and I both just do it on our laptops. We have no previous experience with like radio, and so don't be overwhelmed, just jump in and you'll learn as you go.
So we think the first most important thing when starting a podcast is to find something that you're passionate about. So we're really passionate about women in science, but you can really start a podcast about anything you're willing to talk for hours on end about, and somebody will listen. Podcasts are a great form of media. They're becoming really, really popular, and you can find a podcast on anything. So if you're passionate about makeup, books, dogs, Jurassic Park, you can start a podcast and somebody will listen.
And so we suggest that you team up. Obviously we have, and so it's fun to listen to shows with multiple people, and it's also nice to share the workload.
Yeah, so also when you start a podcast, be prepared for the workload. So before we even started recording our episodes, we spent a lot of time deciding what we wanted to do. So what we wanted to talk about, who we wanted to talk with, what we wanted to put out into the world. So that all happened before we started recording. And now that we're recording, for every 30-minute to 45-minute episode, we have about 3 hours of content that we have to go through and edit. So make time for that as well. We also do a lot of editing to make it sound the way that you'd like. We've decided to transcribe all of our episodes so that if you can't listen to it, you can still read our transcript on our website. And then there's also social media, which is the never-ending beast. So Twitter, Facebook, Instagram always have to be updating, liking, retweeting, things like that. So that takes up a lot of time as well.
And so a big hurdle that we've overcome has been the learning experience that is breaking into the world of podcasting. And so if you're thinking of starting a podcast, you really have to come to terms with the fact that there is going to be growing pains and mistakes made, and also that these are all on record. And so you have this wonderful recorded evolution of your growth as a podcaster, which is a little overwhelming and intimidating, but it's just something that you get used to. And you just learn from your mistakes and grow on. Our early interviews we did over Skype. Some were very garbly, but we released them anyways, and I mean, we've learned since. We have a better recording site, but we're glad that we didn't let the fear of not being a perfect podcaster stop us from releasing the content that we did think was influential and important to be out in the world, and we're still learning.
Yeah, and we like to take our mistakes and put them at the end of our episode as bloopers, so we can't ever get rid of them. The next important thing we recommend is networking. So along with Science Twitter, which is a really great community, there's also a really great podcasting community online. So Lady Pod Squad, Podern Family, things like that, where they reblog your stuff and you reblog their stuff, and you always have something new to check out. It's really great. As well as online, also creating connections within your community. So you always have the support, and you always have other people to lean on as well. So we've been on other podcasts. We invite people to come on our podcast to talk about their work and their projects. And it's just a really nice support system, so you don't feel like you're the only person doing all of this work.
And so when you start an initiative like this, it's important to not think of it as a competition. So we're not reinventing the wheel of women in science initiatives, and instead we're looking to collaborate with other people who have a similar vision. And so this creates also just a good community aspect online.
Mm-hmm. And finally, if we can do it, just 2 grad students in their living room on Skype and their laptops, then you can do it too. We really encourage people to try and get over the fear and the anxiety of a podcast. It's really fun to make. It's a really great way that people love to consume the message that you're giving. So we really do encourage you, if you have a message or your voice that you want to get out there, then we encourage you to podcast because it's great.
So thank you for listening. You can check out our podcast on SoundCloud or iTunes, or hit us up on any kind of social media. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks.